I'm Rick Wiles. This may be the most serious and important True News broadcast in 15 years. Please listen carefully. Life in the USA changed drastically for the worse yesterday with a stunning revelation. Mr. Obama's political appointees in the Pentagon have implemented a new policy that bans Christians in the armed forces from sharing their faith in Jesus Christ with other soldiers. Christians who violate the ban could face court-martial, imprisonment, and or a dishonorable discharge from the U.S. military. The bottom line, the Obaministas have criminalized Christianity in the U.S. military. The old America, the land of the free, home of the brave, is dead. We now live in communist America. And I have to ask the question again. Why are the American people sleeping through this revolution? The new anti-Christian policy is the evil fruit of Mr. Mikey Weinstein, an atheist Jew who founded the Military Religious Freedom Foundation. He was cited by Forward magazine as one of the most influential Jews in America. Barack Obama appointed Mr. Weinstein as his new religious tolerance consultant to the Pentagon. Mr. Weinstein cannot open his mouth without spewing forth venomous denunciations of conservative evangelical Christians. He has labeled conservative Christian organizations such as Focus on the Family, the American Family Association, and the Family Research Council as fundamentalist Christian monsters. In a column published by the liberal HuffingtonPost.com, Mr. Weinstein warned, quote, "Today, we face incredibly well-funded gangs of fundamentalist Christian monsters who terrorize their fellow Americans by forcing their weaponized and twisted version of Christianity upon their helpless subordinates in our nation's armed forces," end of quote. Mr. Weinstein cited Dr. James Dobson, founder of Focus on the Family, as, quote, "illustrating the extremist, militant nature of these homophobic organizations' rhetorically charged propaganda," end of quote. Now, we are not living in Alice in Wonderland. This nightmare is Obamaland. In his perverted version of reality, religious tolerance means shutting the mouths of Christians talking about Jesus Christ. This insane policy comes from the same Muslim Marxist in the White House who has yet been able to force himself to declare that Nidal Hassan's bloody rampage at Fort Hood was an act of Islamic terrorism. 13 American soldiers were brutally murdered on a U.S. Army base on American soil. Yet, Mr. Obama's administration labeled the shooting spree as workplace violence, despite overwhelming evidence linking Nidal Hassan to Anwar al-Awlaki, the Yemeni Amman, who was a recruiter for al-Qaeda and a planner of terrorist attacks. So I must ask, who are the real terrorists in America? Red-blooded Americans from the heartland who believe in Jesus Christ, or a Muslim Marxist from Kenya posing as the American president? Mr. Weinstein claims that Christians in the military, including ordained chaplains, are guilty of treason for sharing their Christian faith among fellow soldiers. He has described Christians in the armed forces as enemies of the Constitution. This Jewish atheist has also described Christian witnessing as an act of spiritual rape, on par with sexual assaults. Under the new policy that is now in effect, American soldiers who dare to tell other soldiers about their faith in Jesus Christ risk being convicted in a court-martial as would a soldier convicted of treason, sedition, murder, rape, or other serious crimes. Court-martial punishment may include imprisonment in a military correctional institution or a dishonorable discharge from the military and loss of pension and benefits. When Mr. Weinstein demands that Christians in the military be branded as traitors, he knows that treason in the military is a crime punishable by death. Mr. Weinstein told the Washington Post, quote, "This is a national security threat. What is happening, aside from sexual assault, is spiritual rape. And what the Pentagon needs to understand is that it is sedition and treason. It should be punished." End of quote. Do you comprehend the seriousness of the policy that is now in effect under Mr. Obama? Christians in the military who defy the order may be put to death by military executioners. So who is next? Mr. Weinstein cites Dr. James Dobson, the founder of Focus on the Family, as one of these terrorists that must be controlled and stifled. Now, he says, regardless of who is teaching Orthodox Christian beliefs from the Bible, quote, "Let's call these ignoble actions what they are, the senseless and cowardly squallings of human monsters." Mikey Weinstein and members of his Jesus-hating Military Religious Freedom Foundation met privately on April 23rd with Pentagon officials. He said that U.S. troops who proselytize their religious views on military bases are guilty of sedition and treason. He said they should be punished by the hundreds, if necessary, to stave off a tidal wave of fundamentalists. Mr. Weinstein reportedly demanded that soldiers who talk about Jesus Christ to other soldiers should be booted out of the military. Furthermore, Mr. Weinstein told Air Force commanders that any officer who attempts to convert others to Christianity should face a court-martial. So this is what religious tolerance looks like under the Obama communist regime. Christians will be persecuted, ostracized, imprisoned, and eventually put to death. I will repeat my earlier statement. Barack Obama has now criminalized Christianity in the U.S. military. Life in America changed on May 1st, May Day, the universal celebration of the communist movement. Keep in mind that this new anti-Christian communist policy of Barack Obama would apply to chaplains too. Therefore, ordained ministers of the gospel of Jesus Christ serving in the armed forces as chaplains to soldiers could possibly face a court-martial conviction for openly sharing their faith in God with other soldiers. Former U.S. Ambassador Joe Wilson, husband of CIA agent Valerie Plame, is a member of the Military Religious Freedom Foundation's board of directors. He said that military chaplains are on military bases to minister to spiritual needs. Quote, "You don't proselytize. It's a workplace violation," end of quote, said the ambassador. So under the Obamanista regime, ordained ministers of the gospel of Jesus Christ will be punished if they share their Christian faith with another soldier when discussing religious matters. The new Obamanista policy was implemented weeks after U.S. Army Lieutenant Colonel Jack Rich sent an email to over 36 of his subordinates at Fort Campbell in Kentucky, advising them to scour the military base for the presence of domestic hate groups Who are these domestic hate groups infiltrating American military bases? Is it Islamic cells with members such as Nidal Hassan, who murdered 13 soldiers at Fort Hood? No. Lieutenant Colonel Rich identified these domestic hate groups as the American Family Association and the Family Research Council. What is their threat to national security? Lieutenant Colonel Rich warned in his email that, quote, the religious right in America has employed a variety of strategies in its efforts to beat back the increasingly confident gay rights movement, end of quote. His 14-page email to military officers documented groups that the U.S. military considers to be anti-gay, anti-immigrant, and anti-Muslim. Lieutenant Colonel Rich, who is the 2nd Battalion 506 Infantry Regiment commander at Fort Hood, told his fellow officers at Fort Campbell that he, quote, just wanted to ensure everyone is somewhat educated on some of the groups out there that do not share our Army values, end of quote. Now, the Jesus-hating Mikey Weinstein feverishly worked to intimidate commanders at Fort Leonard Wood to withdraw its invitation to Christian historian David Barton to speak to 400 military members and their families. Mr. Barton was scheduled to speak this morning on the topic, Our American Heritage, Why History Matters. The event was part of the National Day of Prayer activities around the nation. By the way, the National Day of Prayer was established by an act of Congress in 1952. In a letter to Secretary of Defense Chuck Hagel, Mr. Weinstein justified his demands to disinvite David Barton on the patriotic historian's, quote, contemptuous words against the president, end of quote. Mr. Barton has called Barack Obama, quote, the most biblically hostile U.S. president, end of quote. Mr. Weinstein, the Pentagon's new religious tolerance advisor, told Secretary Hagel that allowing Mr. Barton to speak at Fort Leonard Wood, quote, can be considered nothing less than the condoning and endorsement of statements that, if made by officers who invited him to speak, would be punishable by their court-martial, end of quote. So, in this new world, if you criticize Barack Obama, you are guilty of treason. Again, perhaps you didn't see the notice, but yesterday, May Day, May 1st, Barack Obama signed a declaration, a presidential proclamation declaring May 1st, May Day, as Loyalty Day. May 1st, May Day, the universal celebration of communism. Now, Forward magazine named Mr. Weinstein as one of the most influential Jewish people in America.